To the community of Des Plaines, Cook County, Chicago, corpulent and jovial divorcee John Wayne Gacy was a successful man with his own construction business, a pillar of the local Jaycees, Junior Chamber of Commerce, and a staunch supporter of the Democrats. He was forever active in local events and charities, visiting the sick in hospitals, and organizing parties for underprivileged children, at which he would appear as Pogo the Clown and perform conjuring tricks. But his smile hid a dark and terrible secret. It began in 1967 when the county attorney's office heard suggestions that teenagers working under 25-year-old Gacy's management at the KFC outlets in Waterloo, Iowa, were being invited by him to parties, plied with strong alcohol, and encouraged to take part in illegal sexual activities. Gacy was questioned several times by the police, but they could never gather sufficient evidence. They got it finally in 1968. Gacy seduced the 15-year-old son of a fellow member of the Jaycees. At first, the boy complied with his demands, but eventually became frightened and confessed to his father, who immediately went to the police. While Gacy was in jail awaiting trial, another youngster came forward with a similar charge. Tried in November 1968, Gacy pleaded guilty to charges of sodomy, expecting only a suspended sentence, but to his dismay, he was given a 10-year sentence in prison with a recommendation that he be released on parole after 6 years, the maximum penalty under Iowa law. However, he proved a model prisoner and the parole board released him after only 18 months. Unwilling to go back to Waterloo, he returned to Chicago, determined, it seemed, to put his past behind him. But he could not control his sexual cravings, and on February 12, 1971, he was charged with disorderly conduct in Chicago with a young boy. His accuser did not put in an appearance, however, and the charges were dismissed. Gacy was discharged from his parole in Iowa on October 18, 1971, because the police in that state had not been notified of this latest misdemeanor. According to his own account, Gacy committed his first murder on January 3, 1972. He had begun cruising the streets of Chicago and had picked up his victim, never identified, at the bus terminal. He had married again to lend color to his apparent respectability, and for a while, until the marriage ended in 1976, his homosexual conquests had to be limited to times when his wife was not at home or out of town. His methods were simple. Sometimes he flashed what looked like a police badge and a gun, and arrested his prey. Other times the victims were invited home, given drinks, and shown tricks with his magic handcuffs. Later came sex toys and temporary asphyxiation, until he finished off with strangulation. The bodies were dumped in the crawl space beneath his home, and the pervading odor of decomposition, one of the reasons why his wife left him, was blamed on sewer problems. Others were buried close to the house or disposed of in the nearby river. From 1976, with his wife gone, Gacy was able to accelerate his murderous activities. Between April 6th and June 13th of that year, at least 5 youths were killed, and on October 25th, he murdered 2 on the same evening. Later, Gacy broadened his range, picking up not just teenage runaways, but jailbirds, and male prostitutes. Not all were killed. In December 1977, he abducted Robert Donnelly at gunpoint, tortured and sodomized him at his home, then let him go. 3 months later, 27-year-old Jeffrey Rignall was chloroformed and bound to a homemade rack. Gacy enjoyed several hours FL-degree judging his victim, reapplying chloroform so often that his liver was permanently damaged. When Rignall recovered consciousness, dumped by a lake in Lincoln Park, he immediately informed the police, but it was 4 months before they charged Gacy with misdemeanor, and the case was still on the books many months later. Gacy made his first major mistake, one that was to lead to his final arrest on December 11, 1978. That evening, Mrs. Elizabeth Piest went to collect her 15-year-old son, Robert, from his spare-time work at the Nissan Pharmacy in Des Plaines. He told her to wait a few minutes while he went to see a man about a construction job, but did not return. By midnight, his parents had informed the police, and they spent the rest of the night driving through the streets in search of their son. The following morning, a police captain visited the Nissan Pharmacy, but the proprietor was unable to tell him anything more. However, just as he was leaving, the officer noticed that the store had been recently redecorated and was told that the contractor's name was John Gacy. And yes, the pharmacist remembered him offering Robert Piest some part-time work. Gacy was called and asked to come to the police station. At headquarters, a confident, outgoing model citizen, he recognized a photograph of Robert and confirmed that he had offered him a job. Asked if he would meet police later at his home, he agreed. The visit was not an official search, and everything appeared quite normal. However, just as he was leaving the hallway, the police captain spotted a yellow slip of paper lying on the floor. It was a receipt for a roll of film to be developed at the Nissan Pharmacy and was in the name of Kim Bayers. Gacy shrugged nonchalantly, saying he had no idea how it came to be there. However, the police went immediately to the Piest home, where Robert's mother broke down in tears. Kim Byers was a girlfriend of her son, and he had offered to get the film processed for her. This was probable evidence that Robert had been at Gacy's house, but it was only circumstantial, insufficient for a search warrant to be obtained. Over the next 4 days, Gacy was kept under surveillance, while inquiries gradually uncovered details of his past record of sex offenses in both Iowa and Illinois. Putting up a bold front, Gacy filed a civil lawsuit of $750,000 against the city of Des Plaines, alleging illegal search and seizure, harassment, and slander on December 19th. But on that same day, the police obtained their search warrant. As they searched the house, the police quickly became aware of the foul odor. A detective discovered a trap door in the floor of a cupboard, opened it, and reeled back from the stench that rose from the crawl space below. A brief examination revealed a mass of human remains in a sea of stinking black mud, and Gacy was at once arrested and charged with murder. Next morning, the Cook County medical examiner, Dr. Robert Stein, brought his team to the house. Wearing gas masks and protective clothing, they undertook the appalling task of sorting out the rotting remains, bagging and labeling them, and dispatching them to Stein's laboratory. By December 24th, parts of 16 bodies had been dug out, either from the crawl space or the ground around the house, and a week later the total had risen to 27. Meanwhile, taken to police headquarters, Gacy had begun to provide details of his many murders. He confessed to killing 32 young men and boys over the past 7 years, after having forced them to have sex with him. 5 bodies had been thrown in, the Des Plaines River, including that of Robert Piest. He provided the full names of only 6 of his victims. Most of the others he knew only by their first names. He was also able to identify 2 photographs of missing youths from the files. 4 bodies were finally dragged from the river, although the 5th was not recovered, and the police eventually set Gacy's total at 33. Committed to Cermak Mental Hospital in Chicago to await trial, he attempted to represent himself as insane, attributing his crimes to a sinister alter ego, Bad Jack. The examining psychiatrists were not impressed, but when Gacy stood trial on February 6, 1980, both prosecution and defense teams agreed that a verdict of guilty would hinge upon the question of his sanity. The prosecutor presented the accused as follows: "He is quite simply an evil man." In mitigation, Gacy's attorney argued that any man who could sleep in a house with 29 dead bodies was not evil, but insane. Among the witnesses, 2 teenagers who had stayed at Gacy's home for a time described how he had made them dig trenches in the dirt of the crawl space on the pretext that they were for a new drainage system. The prosecution pointed out that this proved that the murders were premeditated. For the defense, Jeffrey Rignall and Robert Donnelly both described their experiences at Gacy's hands and agreed no sane man would have done what he did. Despite his confessions taken into evidence, Gacy did not take the stand, and the defense case relied largely upon the 4 independent psychiatrists called, who described him as psychotic, a paranoid schizophrenic. Testifying for the prosecution, psychiatrist Dr. Robert Reifman described Gacy as a specifically narcissistic type, so self-obsessed that other people did not matter. I don't believe that you can have 33 cases of temporary insanity. The jury found the defendant guilty, and on March 13, 1980, the judge sentenced him to death on 33 counts of first-degree murder. There were loud cheers from the public benches. Over the following 14 years, appeal after appeal by Gacy's lawyers was refused. He now claimed that the bodies exhumed at his home had been planted during his absence. He described himself as the 34th victim of a plot by unknown conspirators. Finally, on May 11, 1994, he was executed by lethal injection.